So there's a few things that that we do, first of all, when we look at flights, and we look at one, preparedness. So how prepared are you for the flight as an advisor? There's the anticipation phase, and there's also knowing what to do when shit hits the fan. So preparedness, everything starts with a solid itinerary. Okay, that's the foundation. It's the same analogy of a house. If you have a solid foundation, you can stack everything on top of it, and it's solid. And when I say a solid itinerary, it means that most likely and ideally, you'll have all the travelers on one itinerary. So especially if it's a family, it's a lot easier to handle if things go sideways, if you only have to deal with one itinerary versus multiples. You want to have an itinerary that have good connecting time. So good minimum connecting time, meaning less of the 35 minutes connecting time, more of the 2 hours plus connections. And you're probably going to ask me, well, what's the minimum connecting time I should aim for? Well, it all depends on who's traveling and why they're traveling. If it's someone flying across the United States to go and see their family and they don't have accommodation or hotel on the hook at the other end, it kind of flexible in arriving 2, 3, 4 hours later or even a day later, versus someone who is going on a cruise where it definitely needs to get there to board the cruise. Similarly, if you got somebody who goes to, it's a work thing, but they're going to a conference, and well, if you miss the half day of the first day, sucks, but it's not really the end of the world, versus somebody's going to a conference and they're the keynote speaker, so they definitely need to be there. So you can adjust the connecting time based on the risk of what the risk of missing that flight means to the traveler. So I would say to steer clear of anything below 2 hours if you can, because to me, the way I look at it, nobody wants to spend more time at the airport than they have to, but it's like buying an insurance policy. I'd rather have a 2-hour connection or 2.5-hour connection and spend I could have had an hour and a half, let's say. I'd rather spend guarantee an extra hour at the airport than potentially being delayed 5, 6, 7 hours if I miss that short connection. So that's the way I present it to clients. Are you okay spending an extra hour at the airport versus being delayed 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 24 hours later? And then they'll decide and they'll let you know what they're comfortable with. And also minimum connecting time, taking into consideration what the client has to do in that connection. Do they have to change? The first thing you want to look at is, do they have to change terminal? Are they connecting in LA where there's 7 terminal? Are they connecting in JFK where there's multiple terminal? Or are they in Houston where there's just multiple concourse, but they're fairly easy to get from one to the next? If they have to change terminal, you want more time. What time of the year are they traveling in? Is it winter? Where they're going to be connecting? Are they connecting in Chicago? Are they connecting in New York? Are they connecting in Toronto? Are they connecting in Denver? Versus connecting in LA, Houston, Dallas, Charlotte, Miami. Those are all different and have different risks. So those are the things that you want to consider when they're looking at the minimum connection time. You also want to, based on the solid itinerary, you also want to make sure that they're on a good airline. And what I mean by that is there's a difference in between flying Spirit domestically in the United States and flying Delta. Okay. One has no alliance with no one else. So if that flight's canceled, you have to wait till Spirit puts you on another flight. If you're with Delta and Delta cancel, then chances are sucks you lose a nonstop, for example, but perhaps there's a connection to Salt Lake City, to Atlanta, to JFK that you can take that they have available. So your risk of being delayed in terms of how long that could take is diminished greatly when you select a bigger airline and an airline that's part of an alliance like Delta, like American, like United, unlike Spirit, Allegiant, Frontier. Okay. Similarly, on the international side, some people go to Europe. You're guaranteed if somebody's looked online, they're going to come up and say, hey, what about Iceland Air? I saw that they're $400 cheaper than everybody else. There's a reason, right? Iceland Air versus Lufthansa. Lufthansa, Star Alliance, if you miss a flight with Lufthansa, if you miss a connection, they can reaccommodate you or get you going on a United flight, an Air Canada flight. They can get you back. There's more options. Therefore, your interruption is going to be a lot shorter. Okay. So having all your travel zones on one itinerary, looking at minimum connection time and what they need to do at the connection. Another thing that they may need to do at the connection is security or customs. Anyone who comes into the United States to make a connection has to go through U.S. immigration, unless they depart from Canada, because in Canada, they pre-clear U.S. customs. So when they get to the United States, they either leave the airport or they connect to a new flight like a domestic. Now, if you don't want to know any of this, if you don't want to look it up or Google it, then just say 2.5 hours, 3 hours, connection time, and just recommend that. But there's ways, if you want to dive deeper, you can figure out what the client has to do and provide them even more information that increase your value to them. And that's how you could charge more money for flying. And also, that's also how you give them the confidence they need to be good travelers so that they're not so reliant on you. Solid itinerary also means that try to avoid as much as possible codeshare or interline. Just try to book as proper airline as you possibly can. If it's United, just book United flights. Don't dick around with, oh, it's a United flight, but it's operated by Air Canada and all that kind of stuff, because you know what's going to happen if shit hits the fan. You're going to call Air Canada because they hold the ticket, and they're like, well, it's our ticket, but United's flying the plane, so you got to call them. Then you call United, and they go, sorry, we're only flying the plane. The ticket belongs to Air Canada, and then they just throw the ball at each other, and that just increase the time delay to get any resolution. So try to avoid, if you can, any of the codeshares or interline, and just pay attention to airport geography. We just touched on that about minimum connection time. Know your seasons. It's pretty straightforward. If it's winter and you connect to winter cities, more risk of delays, snowstorm, de-icing, all kinds of delays when you deal with weather. And similarly, like in the summertime on the East Coast, thunderstorm everywhere all the time. A lot more chance to have fog in Seattle and San Francisco than you have in Los Angeles. Okay. So people will say, oh, I hate Los Angeles, too many terminals, blah, blah, blah. But you know what? It hardly ever has any weather issues unless, once in a blue moon. But typically, same as Houston, may have rain and thunderstorm in a certain time of year. But many of these airports are pretty safe. And especially LAX now, you can make connections to every single terminal without ever leaving the secure area anymore. So you don't have to exit, walk to the next terminal, go through security again, and go in. Everything can happen behind security, and you can find the corridors and the maps on the LAX website. It's super easy to pass on to clients and give them, again, the confidence they need. If they have bad experience in the past, things have changed. I mean, I just connected last Christmas to LAX coming in from Mexico, and I do have a global entry, which is the Nexus for us in Canada. And when I went through the line, the only thing I had to do is stand in front of a machine that scanned my eyes and beeped. And I didn't know what else to do until the agent says, you're good to go. And I was like, that's it, just beep. And I was on my way. So that was the easiest and most seamless connection I've ever had to do anywhere. And that happened at LAX. So, and the key in a solid itinerary is to have backup plans. So if you do the booking for your clients and the research, as part of your research, you should find the ideal itinerary for your client. And you should say, you should run these scenarios. What happened if they can't leave Chicago at 6 a.m.? What next flight can get them there? What happened if they get to New York City and they miss their connecting flight? How do I get them to Italy? What's the next flight? What are the next times? And you note down the times, the flight numbers, and you prepare a backup plan for that in case you need it. Then you have in your back pocket and you can just pull it out. And it's either for you to better able to help your client so that if the flight gets canceled, You're not scrambling. You already know where to look. You already have the information. You could just step on it and get it done. And if you're helping your clients travel and they made the booking or somebody else made the booking, then you can just pass on that information. You can tell the client, listen, here's the next best flight. Here's the flight number. Here's the time. When you get to talk to someone, give them that piece of paper, because trust me, these airline agents, when they line up with 200 people behind in front of them, and everybody's going to a different place, so they have to search everything, they're going to pick the first thing that comes on their screen. Okay. So if you get to the desk and you go, listen, I'm delayed going here, this is the flight I want, they'll be like, oh my God, thank you for saving me to look for this shit. And then you give them the flight you want, and if it's available, they'll be like, here you go, got you on the next flight, here you boarding pass. Okay. So you can pass on that information. And if you ever need it, sucks, but when you do, it pays its weight in gold. So that's a solid itinerary. That's preparedness.